If you're newer to knitting and you are just dying to get started and jump into your next project, you've picked out the pattern and you're ready to go, but now you're a little bit stumped as to what the next stage, what the next step is going to be to actually move you along. So this video is all about how do you pick a yarn, possibly substituting if you can't find the yarn that's used in the particular pattern, or maybe it's out of your budget. How do you pick the right kind of needles and figuring out if the needles you have will work for that particular project. And then taking a look at the pattern and what size do you knit if there's multiple sizes and things like that. So come on in and we're going to take a pattern and just start working through and figuring out how you make all of those decisions and get started actually knitting your project. When you're ready to get started on your project, you will start off, pick out your pattern, and then what you're going to have to do after that is find the right type of needle and size of needle, and then find a yarn that goes with it. And you may have a few other little extras that you possibly need as well with it. So we'll start first of all with, we'll say we've picked the pattern. So in this case, I'm going to take a look at the floop. Then what you will do is, this one is easy because there's just a single size. Normally what you would do is you will take a look at the measurements. So if it's for a hat, you'll measure around your head, figure out what size you want, and from there it's going to tell you for that size how much yarn you want. So you'll have yardage. In this case it's both in yards and in meters, and it's going to tell you the suggested needle size to get what's called the gauge. So the gauge is the size you're going to have for each stitch, and that's determined by a combination of the thickness of the yarn and the size of the knitting needle that you're going to knit it with. So if the most straightforward is to get the yarn that's called for in the pattern. So in this case, what we've gone and picked is it's Manastil Uruguay Franca, which is a super chunky single ply yarn. So what that is, you see it's 100% wool, and you see how when I twist it, it's just one single strand of yarn. That's what single ply means. Different kinds of yarn will have, if I untwist this one, there's lots of different individual strands and they're called plies. So it would be, it makes the yarn behave differently when the plies are different. So for this one, ideally if you can get one that is wool, roughly the same yardage. So when you've got for the yarn here, it says there's 114 yards in 150 grams. That gives you an idea of roughly how thick the yarn is. And then the last thing is you want to take a look at how it's made, but that's less critical than the yardage and the fiber. So try and match it as closely as possible. When you get yarn as well on the ball band, you're going to have a suggested gauge. Ideally what you're looking for is one that is going to come in to the actual similar to the gauge in the pattern, because then you know you're on the right track if you're kind of close to matching up the gauge. But everyone's gauge is unique, so you are going to have to check. So you'll check that once you get your needle size. So the next thing then, what you want to do is you need to pick your needles. So there's two things with this. There is the needle size, which is how wide the needle is, which will determine the size of the stitch. And then and after that is the type of needle. So this one is a circular needle, but it's a shorter one. See the length, that's the length of the needle. This is a long one. See how long that is? The cord in between is very long. So you can decide which type you need. So if you're doing a hat, you can start with a very short one like this. It works fine up to the very top. Then you run into a bit of problems because you're going to need one of two things. You're going to need either double pointed needles to form a circle at the top, or you're going to need a much longer cord so that you can do what's called magic loop. So you can also then go ahead and get a very long needle and do magic loop for the whole way up, which is what I've suggested in this pattern, simply because it means you don't have to change the needle size, because the whole pattern, this particular one, is worked in the round. So the way the pattern is worked is going to dictate what kind of needles you're going to need. So with this particular one, you can either get into the pattern, it'll say use a long circular using the magic loop in this one. But you can actually tell from the pattern itself, it tells you here, you're using this size needle, so it's a US size 13 or a 9mm, and we're suggesting that it's 40-inch long for magic loop, or you can use double pointed needles. Or what I haven't put down is the fact that you can use a circular at the start and then move on to double pointed needles. So that will be determined by the kind of thing you're knitting. So for a hat, it's going to be in the round, and you will have to make that decision. If you're doing a sweater and it's in the round, then the length is going to be determined by the size of your sweater. So if you're doing a 40-inch circumference, you're not going to want a needle that's bigger than 40 inches. You could use 32-inch because you can squish the stitches up, or you can move up to a 40 at a push, but ideally a little shorter. If you're doing something that is worked back and forth in rows, then just straight needles, you can use it if there isn't too many stitches. Or I love the fact that you can use circular needles, work back and forth in rows as well, because of the fact that it really does, it allows you to just use it like straight needles back and forth. So circular needles, particularly longer ones, are very, very multifunctional. So once you've picked your needle type and you've done that, you're pretty much ready to go. You just want to pop onto the pattern, cast on the number of stitches they want. But first of all, I would suggest that you go and do what's called a gauge swatch. We'll have a little bit of information down below. You get started with that and you're ready to fly through the pattern then. But if you've got questions on anything in the pattern process, just pop us a message down below and we'll answer them for you.